Good evening. Boris Johnson has faced the House of Commons for the first time following his defeat in the Supreme Court yesterday. There were very bad-tempered exchanges at some times as the Prime Minister declared that the Supreme Court had been wrong to pronounce on a political question at a time of great national controversy. The highest court in the land ruled unanimously yesterday that Mr Johnson had acted unlawfully when he suspended Parliament for 5 weeks. The Prime Minister rejected Labour calls for him to resign and then challenged the opposition parties to agree to a general election. We start with our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg.
To lead often is to be alone. Boris Johnson on the tarmac clutching his red box of business. It was Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament, found against the law. Boris Johnson racing back from New York to face MPs' anger. But on this dangerous road, the Prime Minister chose tonight to whip up the rancour himself.
Statement, the Prime Minister.
No regret, no remorse. He questioned the judge's ruling yesterday.
It is absolutely no disrespect to the judiciary to say I think the court was wrong to pronounce on what is essentially a political question.
He chose attack as the best form of defence, rather than give answers, goading the opposition to bring him down.
Out of sheer selfishness and political cowardice, members opposite are unwilling to move aside and give the people a say. We will not betray the people who sent us here. We will not. That's what they want to do. We will not abandon the priorities that matter to the public. And we will continue to challenge those opposition parties to uphold democracy.
Some Labour MPs shouted, "You should be in jail," and shame. Jeremy Corbyn's response, he should go.
After yesterday's ruling, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister should have done the honourable thing and resigned. The government has failed to silence our democracy.
But he was resolute. Jeremy Corbyn won't take the chance of an election now, not until there's a guarantee we won't leave the EU without a deal next month.
He says he wants a general election. I want a general election. It's very simple. If you want an election, if he wants an election, get an extension and let's have an election.
But there were verbal punches back.
He can't control his own party. He can't decide whether he's for leave or for remain. He's being held captive by his colleagues. The electorate are being held captive by this zombie parliament and this zombie opposition. And he wants the entire country to be held captive in the EU after October the 31st at a cost of more than £1 billion a month. We say no. I say no. Let's get Brexit done and let's take this country forward.
The more savage it was, the more they roared. The Prime Minister had almost provoked his own side into backing him like this. If anything, that applause encouraged the opposition parties to slam him.
If my son can apologise for kicking a football indoors, surely the Prime Minister can have the humility to say sorry for misleading the Queen, misleading the country and illegally shutting down our democracy.
And at a time like this, don't bet on what might come next.
The opposition must unite to trigger a vote of no confidence to bring this chaotic government down.
Does he still believe it to be right and proper to seek to impeach a Prime Minister who has been judged to mislead the public?
There was nothing still about tonight. Frustrations erupting.
We've seen the political establishment in this House, the commercial establishment, and now the judicial establishment go against the will of the people. They are angry. They feel thwarted by the establishment.
Those who claim to defend parliamentary democracy
are in fact putting it at grave risk by alienating a large proportion of the population who fear that this House is trying to block a democratic referendum result that we promised to honour.
Disdain from the Prime Minister's former colleagues.
He's pitting Brexit against Remain, young against old, Scotland against England, and people against the Parliament.
And maybe fear too.
Many of us in this place subject to death threats and abuse every single day. And let me tell the Prime Minister that they often quote his words: surrender act, betrayal, traitor. And I, for one, am sick of it.
I think, Mr. Speaker, I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I've never heard such humbug in all my life.
The outrage at his response louder than Boris Johnson's attempt to make himself heard. More acute when the murdered MP Jo Cox's successor pleaded with him too.
Will he, going forward, moderate his language so that we will all feel secure when we're going about our jobs?
The best way to honour the memory of Jo Cox, and indeed the best way to bring this country together, would be, I think, to get Brexit done.
Tonight, at least, it's almost impossible to imagine those inside being able to agree on whether it's night or day. The government's top lawyer earlier declared it over.
This Parliament is a dead Parliament. It should no longer sit. It has no moral right to sit on these green benches.
This Prime Minister to talk about morals and morality is a disgrace!
When outrage is in fashion, agreement the country may crave is hard to find.
Let's go live to Westminster. Laura's there for us. Laura, have you ever seen a session like that?
Well, Huw, I've watched more hours of action in the House of Commons than I care to remember, particularly the bruising, fractured and fractious debates over the last few years. And I can't remember an evening when it was quite so angry, when nerves were quite so raw. Of course, there are legitimate passions on both sides of this debate and genuine frustrations too in the country on all sides that this place has failed to come to any agreement on Brexit, that decision that was taken by the country so long ago. But there are real concerns about how this debate has taken a turn since Boris Johnson has become Prime Minister. We know there's never been any secret that he's a politician who is happy to provoke. He thinks that stirs up his enemies and even excites his base. But tonight it felt like Parliament was a place of fear and loathing. And if that's a group of people that Boris Johnson ever hopes to get on sides, even to give him the election he so desires, that is going to be a struggle. And I think in the morning there are not going to be many even Conservative MPs who find it easy to defend what happened there tonight. Of course, though, politics has been happening at 1,000,000 miles an hour. It's very difficult to say on one evening this will set a course, but I think this could turn out to be an evening where the tone in Parliament changed. It feels a little in this moment that the top has come out of a bottle of something, and whatever comes next, it may be difficult to put it back.
Laura, once again, thank you. Laura Kuenssberg there on the day's events at Westminster, our political editor. Well, yesterday's ruling by the UK Supreme Court has prompted thousands of questions from viewers and listeners in all parts of BBC News. So our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, has been answering some of those questions, and here's the first one.
What happens next?
Well, Boris Johnson was already in a tight political corner, and he still is. Just look at his relentless pressure to force an early election. The mood has been transformed. The ferocity of the argument off the scale. And now the government's opponents are back in the Commons. They can close in. Try to pass legislation to tighten up the law they've already passed to close off the option of leaving with no deal on October the 31st. And force Boris Johnson to either land a deal or do the last thing that he wants, to seek another Brexit extension.
Will Brexit happen?
Good question. wish I knew. Out here, against Brexit, for Brexit, they'd love to know the answer. A lot depends on the Brexit negotiations in Brussels, where the UK side and the EU side are still some way apart. And the EU summit on October the 17th is rushing up fast. No deal by October the 19th, and Boris Johnson, by law, will have to extend Brexit, or try to, unless, that is, the EU or any of its members decide they've had enough, in which case Britain is shown the door. In the end, after 3 years, if Parliament can't decide all this, it may be up to you.
Will there be a general election?
Now that's an easy one, and the answer's yes. All sides want an election. The argument is about when. Opposition MPs say no election until a no-deal Brexit is off the table. They say they're worried about the disruption a no-deal Brexit would cause, but they know, and so does the Prime Minister, that a delay would cost the Tories lots of Brexit supporters' votes. Boris Johnson's election challenges, his taunts of cowardice, are not working. He's under pressure, and when he says he wants a deal, he means it. This won't be a one-issue election, but it'll seem like it, and it's coming soon.
That was John Pienaar, our Deputy Political Editor, answering just a few of the questions that people have been sending in. Now, British business owners who attended a meeting with the Cabinet Minister Michael Gove this week have denied his claim that industry had told him it is ready for a no-deal Brexit. Mr Gove, who's in charge of preparations for a no-deal scenario, claimed today that the automotive sector and the retail sector had both told him that they were ready. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, has the story. He's been speaking to people at the meeting. What are they saying?
Well, amid the heated scenes we saw in the Commons, there was that one claim that did cause a raft of arched eyebrows, I should say, across my industrial contacts. It was the fact not just that the no-deal minister had said that key industries, the car industry and retail, would be ready for a no-deal next month, but that they had said that at a meeting this week on Monday in Coventry. I got responses like this: no way, that is the message you could have gone away with from someone there. Someone else there said no deal's not an option, it's catastrophic. I got hold of a document prepared for that meeting that says they're preparing the best they can, the manufacturers, but it's creating huge costs, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, one way you might explain this is that the government has a different definition of what ready would mean. Manufacturers are saying, yes, they are trying to get prepared as best they can for a situation so uncertain. But if the government is trying to send the message that that means there'll be no disruption, they may well be in for a shock next month.
OK, Faisal, again, thanks very much. Faisal Islam there, our economics editor. Now, yesterday's events in the Supreme Court on the resumption of parliamentary business as the Brexit deadline approaches has prompted even more questions from voters about what happens next. In Portsmouth, 58% of people voted to leave the European Union, while almost 42% voted to remain. So our special correspondent Lucy Manning has spent the day in the marginal Labour seat of Portsmouth South.
I will remain confident in this. I will see the goodness of the Lord. I will remain. I will remain.
This was just a coincidence. The University Gospel Choir is not singing about Brexit. The Prime Minister not liking what he heard from the Supreme Court.
I personally believe that he's acting quite outrageously, and it's not in thought of the country but himself.
All Labour supporters in the middle, Rachel backs leave. Precious and Blessing remain.
In order for Brexit to happen, he needs the help of the other MPs. It's not something that he can do by himself. So I do think that he probably had the right idea, but just went about it the wrong way, I think.
Do you think there should be a general election?
Not yet. I think let's sort out Brexit, let's get that sorted, and then afterwards, let's do an election, because I feel like they're now beginning to diverge from the situation at hand and what is here and what is current and needs to be sorted. A general election does need to happen.
Portsmouth is one of the busiest ferry ports, and there are concerns about the impact of a no-deal Brexit. Defeat in the courts after repeated defeats in Parliament might not look like the best way to win an election in this marginal Labour seat, but the Prime Minister will be hoping his strategy of appearing to back voters against Parliament will pay off. At Fratton Community Centre, Conservative Leave voter Michael supports him.
Who do you think's right, the courts or the Prime
Well,
Minister?
I think the Prime Minister, because he leads the country. He's about the only one who's going to get his seat.
What should the MPs be doing now they're back today?
Well, I heard MP say this morning he ain't got a clue what he's going to do.
Leavers like Joyce feeling a little stitched up by MPs and the court. She did vote Conservative.
I think he's doing his best. I don't know that he's going to get to results. I should be voting Brexit. Brexit Party.
You don't think Boris Johnson's doing enough?
I think anybody will let him. I don't think the other half of Parliament will actually allow him to.
Hazel was a Lib Dem voter. Would you back Boris Johnson if he gets the UK out of the EU?
If he got us out, yes, then I would back him. If he didn't get us out, then I'm not sure whether I would or not. Because it worries me what he would do next to get us out.
A warning here for all MPs, though. Voters told us they want them to use the extra days in Parliament to talk about issues that don't involve Brexit. Lucy Manning, BBC News.